I was always good at math as a kid. Brilliant at it. At a restaurant, I could calculate the tip in 3 seconds flat, down to the tenth of a cent, and find what each person had to pay, including their share of the sales tax. This was at the age of about 7. I was aces at algebra. Numbers just made sense to me. There was something pure about them, something that was easier to wrap my head around than all the shifting, jumbled meanings and sounds that leapt at me when we read aloud in English class. I was in 7th grade when my Baba got sick. She had always been a frail little woman, with those tiny, thin bird bones, but she started growing smaller and smaller until her edges stuck out of her. Her elbows were sharp and her knees were knobby, and when she moved her gnarled hands, the same ones that had pulled a plow and kneaded bread and coddled dozens of children, you could see the tendons in them shifting and pulling at the skin, the age spots and old scars rippling over sharp knuckles. We lived far away from her, and my mother was fiercely independent, so I didn't know her as well as I probably should have. We saw her every Thanksgiving, Christmas, and Easter. 3 times a year exactly, the required social visits that always ended with promises to come home more, promises my mother never really intended to keep. But she always smiled at me when I was nudged forward to give her a tentative hug. She was missing a canine, and I was fairly sure she'd never seen a dentist in her entire life, but when she held me to her breast with her slender, wiry arms, I would forget all that. And she sent me a birthday card every single year, always about a week early because she had little faith in the postman and wanted to be sure I got it on time. There was always $2 in it. For a Big Mac, she wrote on the card. I used to think it was stupid. I knew she wasn't well, but it scared me to see her emaciated and half-lucid, her mouth loose and her eyes deep with suffering. I couldn't pretend to be chipper and upbeat like my mother did. We went to the hospital. I curled up in the pleather armchair in the corner and read celebrity magazines that were 3 years old. I liked to pretend that they were brand new and I could see into the future. I shook my head at Nick and Jessica and gave Jen a sympathetic smile, because all the rumors were true, and she would never be able to compete with those lips. Baba's breath rattled across the room, and I gave her a weak smile as the nurse tried to placate her with some watery green jello. We knew by February that she was near the end. One night, it was a Tuesday, Mom asked me if I wanted to go visit Baba with her. Her hazel eyes were tired. It was how I knew that my grandmother would not recover that look in my mother's eyes. I asked her in choked, awkward bursts if Baba was going to die that night. I was just a kid, all of 11, and not sure how to properly feel about the death of someone you didn't really know but should have loved very deeply. She put her arms around me. I was aware that it was more for her own sake than mine. I didn't mind. No, she assured me, there'll be time. It doesn't have to be tonight. So I stayed home to do my algebra homework. Bob sat me down in the kitchen with my books, a microwave pizza, and her cell phone primed to 911, just in case. She went out into the night, and I sat at the wooden table that had the honest feel of years of dinners being cooked and served on it, humbled by knife marks that were made when it doubled as a chopping board, and by stains that scrubbed off the surface but settled into the deep grooves, and I felt glad. I didn't want to have to confront the way my grandmother's body was failing, every intimacy laid bare, or the awkwardness I felt when I sat beside her, touching her paper-thin skin, wondering what the appropriate thing to do or feel was, feeling guilty that I didn't know, that it didn't come naturally, that I was so concerned with what I should be doing when she was lying beside me dying. At that old kitchen table, I put her from my mind. She died that night, while I sat at home feeling satisfied with my quadratic equations. I failed algebra twice after that, and I always asked for separate tabs and just leave a 5. The funeral was odd. I managed to muster a few tears when the choir sang or the preacher said something particularly mushy, but even as I felt the moisture waver at the edges of my tear ducts, "Fall, fall," I urged them silently. It felt disrespectful and false. It was just to satisfy expectations. Mom cried into a linen handkerchief, the same one she had nursed when Dad left for good. I wondered if it would taste like salt if I pressed it against my tongue. I wondered if tears could stain or leave a chemical signature. I wondered a lot of things. Like if there was a God and a heaven, and if Baba could see into my heart and knew that I really did mean well, I couldn't understand. I thought that she might have. They put her into the ground and it was over. Mom tottered precariously on the edge of something for a few days. What, I'll never know. And then life eased back into its usual lull. There was school and soccer practice, and the seasons tumbled easily over each other until it was August, and I realized I was waiting for a birthday card that wouldn't come. And somehow, suddenly, as if someone had reached down and placed the knowledge, whole, perfect and shining into me, I knew what to do. I told Mom I was going to the library to do a history project and walked out of the door with my warmest coat in the pocket of my jeans fat with the wad of $1 bills that I stored in the sneaker under the bed. $17 in all. I walked a few blocks to pick up what I would need, then took a bus across the city to the far-flung suburb that I had been to only twice in my life. I unwrapped the hamburgers from their bright, flimsy wax paper wrappings, bit into one lukewarm sandwich, and placed the other on the headstone beside me. I thought about Baba's shiny black beetle eyes, and the way she talked about old country, and always used lard instead of butter, and her smile with the gap between the two front teeth and the missing canine, and how her house always smelled like cabbage and sausage. I remembered that she could swear like a sailor, but never would in English, and that she had played the violin once, before her arthritis set in. I cried then, half a year later, sitting on my grandmother's grave with half a Big Mac in my hand and one arm wrapped around my stomach as if holding myself together. The sky was gray that day, and I found out that tears do stain, but in different ways than I ever expected. It felt right this time to cry for her, and I murmured little apologies. I'm sorry I faked it. I'm sorry I didn't know you better. I'm sorry that I didn't realize until now. And after a long, long time in which I felt the entire contents of heaven and earth move within me, I stood up, brushed myself off, patted the stone, and walked away. I called Mom from a payphone. She was livid, but I was perfectly calm. Please come pick me up now, I can remember asking, as if it was the most natural thing in the world for me to be across town without her knowledge. And I carried within me this one sepia-toned memory that had come to me through the shimmering, hot haze of tears, an image I held carefully in the empty space just behind my rib cage. Mom is younger, her hair permed and frizzy and her eyeliner too thick, except it's running down her face because she's crying, her head against Baba's bird chest as those wise fingers smooth over her hair. He's gone, she's sobbing into the crook of her mother's neck. He's not coming back. Oh, Mashka, I've ruined everything. Baba's hands hold her headstrong child to her, rocking her gently back and forth. There, my darling, she soothes, her knuckles kneading circles against my mother's back. We all do the best we can. Her eyes seek me out over my mother's shoulder, a dark slip of a child, barely 5 years old, nursing a doll because I can't really comfort the woman who raised me. My eyes were bright with fear. Come here, my little Senka. She opens her arms and enfolds us both, her thin, wrinkled mouth pressing against the crown of my head. Her voice is soft and even and sounds like the rain and prayers. We all do the very best we can. Quit.